Hi, everyone. My name is Emily Pick, and I am a product marketing manager here at Data.World. Our first keynote speaker today isn't afraid of a hot take, especially when it comes to data governance. Join me in welcoming Laura Madsen, CEO of Moxie Analytics.
Hi, Emily. Thank you for that introduction. That's actually very true. I'm not afraid of a hot take. As a matter of fact, one might say that I really enjoy it. And that's what we're going to talk a little bit about today. Some of those hot takes when it comes to data governance and disrupting data governance, if you will. Excuse me. So, it's interesting when I started writing the book Disrupting Data Governance, shameless plug, my apologies. One of the things I really started thinking about was the data industry and where we were at the time. This was late 2018, early 2019. And I did a bunch of research, and one of the things I tripped on, of course, was data governance. And so my initial hesitation was really this: I kind of hate data governance. And I know that's probably controversial to say, but fair warning, you did have a warning about the hot takes. And here's the reason why I traditionally hate data governance. I have been responsible or accountable for it in data functions for many, many years. And it was often the thing that would throw me off. I would have a difficult time achieving what was supposed to be data governance. It was bureaucratic, it was slow, it was expensive, it had no real value add to most of the organization. And so it was always the thing that was kind of tripping me up, right? So yeah, I have come to sort of traditionally, up to this point, hate data governance, but there's kind of a thin line between love and hate. And that's what we're going to explore today. So one of the things that I've hated about data governance is how convoluted it has been traditionally, right? So data governance actually came out of early data warehouses. And, somewhere around the late 90s, when data warehouses were relatively small, we knew we had to sort of govern our data, and up sprouted data governance. And so I really hadn't thought critically about data governance for a really long time until I started doing the research. And I was Googling the definition of data governance in 2019. And this was on the sort of this heels of trying to figure out, in the data industry, where are the Achilles heels for our programs? What's preventing us from being extremely successful? So I Googled this, and seriously, guys, it was like a page long. So thankfully, that definition is no longer there. But it was 2 full paragraphs, and it was a page long. And I'm thinking to myself, how am I supposed to be successful? How am I supposed to operationalize my definition of data governance when it's a page long? It had become the proverbial other bucket for data and analytics. Any function associated with it ended up in data governance if we couldn't define it. And in that moment, I knew, despite how much I didn't want to, I knew I had to write the book about how to blow this up, right? Because there's no way we can be successful if there's no clean definition. If I can't tell you exactly the value I'm delivering to my stakeholders, if I can't communicate that in a way that's clear and concise, that maybe we could even come to some kind of a metric for to prove that I'm successful, I will never be able to be successful. So yes, that's how I came to this point. And the first thing I wanted to do is simplify that definition, something you could actually operationalize so that you knew what you were doing on an average Tuesday. If you were going to ask your organization to invest in data governance, then you should be able to be very clear and concise about this. Now, I didn't come up with a beautiful, eloquent definition, right, of data governance, but I had 4 primary categories that I knew data governance had to be successful on. The first one is increasing usage. I will tell you that this is true for any function in your data team. If you're not trying to increase the usage of your data, what are you doing? What are you doing? The only reason we're here, the only reason we're spending the time or the money is to increase the usage of the data. That's the asset to the organization. But for so long, data governance was attributed to this slowness, to this bureaucracy, to this actually preventing people from using the data, a very command and control kind of construct. So first and foremost, increasing usage of the data, getting that into the people's hands. Number 2, improving data quality. Look, there is no data quality without data governance. I know, controversial, hashtag hot take. But there is no data governance without data quality. They need each other. It's like peanut butter and jelly, or peanut butter and chocolate, or I don't know, something else. They need each other, right? How else are you supposed to prove that data governance is being successful if you can't prove that your data quality hasn't improved over time? It's a yin and a yang. Number 3, creating a data lineage. It's this idea that if there's any foundation to data governance, it's where the data starts and where the data ends. We used to call it source to target, soup to nuts, cradle to grave, whatever you want to call it. But you need to understand where your data comes in and what happens to it through its life cycle, so that you can track it, so that you can track quality, so that you know who's touching it. Creating that data lineage, maintaining that data lineage is very important to the foundation of what data governance is. And finally, because at the end of the day, we're still talking about data governance, we have to ensure data protection. Folks, that is the cost of doing business. It does not need to be the first thing that you do. And as a matter of fact, I would contend that the accountability to protect your data actually lies with your chief privacy officer, your compliance officer, your information security or InfoSec team. They have the accountability to write those policies and procedures. Your responsibility is to execute against them. But the cost of doing business in a modern organization is to ensure data protection. So it's with those 4 categories: increasing usage, improving data quality, creating or maintaining a data lineage, and ensuring data protection, that we start to think about how we can disrupt our data governance programs. So we have to start with the 4 pillars that every organization loves. We often use these when we start a digital transformation, or really any other transformation in our organizations. It is people, process, technology, and I add a 4th, which is culture. So with each of these, we'll talk a little bit about what that means against this new definition, or these new 4 operational categories of data governance. So first things first, people. You can't do this work without people. I know, that's probably not very much of a hot take. That's kind of like, yeah, duh. But for a really long time, the people that built and ran our data governance functions were what are often called linchpins, right? They are the glue that holds the whole dang thing together. They're the people that know where all your data bodies are buried. They've been around forever. They know your weaknesses. They know the decisions. They know the history, that 6 years ago, this person made this decision, and therefore all these things happened as a result. They know that back in 2015, on a batch load over the weekend one day, we dropped all the data that ended in 1. True story. They know those things. And for a long time, that was all we could hope for, because they ran all these committees and these councils. And if those committees couldn't make the decision, everybody trusted that data governance leader because they had all of that expertise. But the problem with running your data governance function like that is it's not particularly resilient, right? Because if that person leaves, you're dead in the water. And I can tell you that this happens all the time, and it still happens all the time, because I get those phone calls. Oh, our data governance leader left. What do I do now? Right? Because it just stopped. Everything just stopped. So you can't have a responsive and resilient data governance function if your data leader or your data governance leader holds everything sort of close to their chest, holding all those cards, and as soon as they leave, it's done. So what we want to think about more is agile concept, which is a theme you'll hear, no surprise, of a product owner. And that person is primarily responsible for removing barriers and getting things done. They don't have to have all of the knowledge. What they have to know is enough to be able to allow other people to get the job done. I like to think about them like ambassadors, where their jobs are equal part promotion and protection. And in this case, it's of the data, right? And if we're really thinking about responsive and resilient data governance efforts in the context of people, I have one quick note about committees and councils and executive stakeholders. And this is really important because the vast majority of our traditional command and control data governance functions relied heavily on these councils, where you had data steward council, you had a data owner council, you had an executive stakeholder council, and you met with them all the time. And it was really the only way that you could A, get decisions made, and B, communicate up to those folks. And oftentimes I hear that, well, it's the only way I can get them to participate. And it's like 1 hour a month, and it should be the minimum. That is the minimum. And if they really feel like data is an asset, then they need to put more skin in the game. Your committees and councils aren't working for your benefit. As a matter of fact, they're bureaucratic and they're slow, and they usually don't have the right information to make the decisions anyway. So sometimes you need to have committees or councils because your organization may be set up that way. But what I want you to just clearly understand is that your executive stakeholder, those people that are at the end of the day accountable to ensure that you have all the resources that you need to get the job done, shouldn't get off with just 1 hour a month. You have got to make them more of an active participant. And I'm not saying that they're going to, get in there and start analyzing the data, although some probably would want to. Bad idea. What I'm saying is, if you're really asking them to participate, then they need to know more and they need to understand more so that when those all-important boardroom doors close and the budget numbers are trying to be allocated, that they understand enough to say, you know what, we really need this and here's why, versus I meet with them once a month and I don't really know what's going on, but it seems slow, so maybe not. So we've got to flip the switch a little bit here and stop relying on our committees and councils to make big decisions that they're probably not particularly well versed in making. And we've got to ask our executive stakeholders to be a lot more involved. And that will help us build a more responsive and resilient data governance function. So let's talk about process. Because, it's the framework in which our data governance teams run. And I'm not going to get into a lot of this waterfall, blah, 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 because I'm here to tell you that I firmly believe that agile methods are a way forward for data governance. And here's our challenge. Data governance, as we've already talked about, the fact that it had a page-long definition at one point, is complicated. It's hard. I'm not going to lie to you. There's a lot of layers. It's complex. There's a lot of people involved. There's an enormous amount of data. There's definitions. There's data quality parameters. There's crazy things that happen with the data. It's hard. And as a data person, one of your primary jobs is to try to articulate and communicate that, right? So if we're going to do all that, and it's already really complicated, and then you add in what I lovingly refer to as flaming hoops of traditional project management capabilities in organizations, where all we're doing is filling out checkboxes to prove that we're actually doing something, then you're not really moving the dial forward. You're just busy trying to prove that you're busy, which is, not a great use of time or money or brain cells. So here's the deal. The great thing about Agile is you can use it to break down this extremely complicated, multi-layered function into iterative cycles. And at the end of these iterative cycles, you can actually just kind of hand off the work, right? And be like, hey, I don't need to jump through this flaming hoop. Here's the thing I did in those 2 weeks. And one of the benefits of that is it keeps moving things forward. And you are able to hand off things, and you do provide value really quickly. And you're constantly communicating at a minimum every 2 weeks of the stuff that you're doing, which has a high value add. Because the one thing that data governance has to be able to do in 2022 and beyond is to operate at the speed of business. And if all we're doing is trying to find a way to slow things down, right? Like, whoa, I got to slow this merry-go-round ride so I can get off for a minute, so I can analyze the data and figure out what's going on. We don't have that luxury. We have to operate at the speed of business. So if you can take those things and break them down into smaller pieces and find ways to provide value in those smaller chunks through an agile process, then you're going to be better off in the long run. Because there are no big milestones in data governance. It's one of the challenges we have. It's not a quick win kind of effort. This is a journey, not a destination. And as I've learned recently from a road trip, those journeys, they can be hard. Sometimes, they can be hard. The great thing about Agile and the 2 weeks sprints is that every 2 weeks you can celebrate something rather than just working and working and never celebrating anything. So the Agile processes allow us to operate at the speed of business, and the shift in the people allow us to be more responsive and resilient in our data governance efforts. So what's our third pillar? Of course, it's technology. So this may be a little bit of a hot take, considering I'm standing on the Data.World Summit stage virtually. But this is actually one of the last things I want you to think about. And I know it seems odd, A, because I'm standing here, and B, because one of the things I said is you have to create or maintain a data lineage. But here's my point. If you don't have your people figured out, and you don't have your process figured out, you don't know the who, the what, the when, the why are you doing this? What value can you provide to your organization? Who's going to do it? When are they going to do it? How are they going to do it? If you don't know any of those pieces, just buying and implementing a product, a piece of software, isn't going to help you. As a matter of fact, it's probably going to speed things up in a way that you're not really comfortable with, because eventually somebody's going to ask you for an ROI because you spent money. And you really won't have one because all you've done is done a bunch of stuff that you haven't defined very well faster. So it's actually one of the last things I want you to do is to think about your process for technology, a data catalog, as it were. Because once you solve for the problem of who are the people, how are they going to work, who are the data stewards, who are your data owners, if you have to have a council, how do they operate? When your executive stakeholder gets involved and then they give you that framework and the boundary for how things get done, then, and you start your process, your, your framework, your agile framework, and maybe you're using Kanban, you work out all the kinks early on. And then you buy a piece of software and then you can do that at scale, right? And then you're going to be a lot more successful. But so many times I get organizations calling me saying something like, well, we bought a data catalog and defined a bunch of stuff, but nobody's using it and our data governance has failed again. Or my personal favorite, well, I've been tracking metadata for 10 years, but it's weird because I can't seem to get a handle on data governance. Yeah, it's because you haven't defined the people and you haven't defined the process and you haven't helped your organization understand the value of data governance to their day in and day out, which is critically important when you're running a data governance function. And most vendors, and Data.World included, because I've had this discussion with them, feel strongly about this. They really, really want you to get your ducks in a row first, because then they're going to be more successful and be better partners to you. That's not a shameless plug, it's just the reality. So slow down when it comes to technology and make sure that you really know what you're doing, when you're doing it, why you're doing it, and that you have some ability to work out some of the kinks before you run off and buy some technology. You can thank me later. So the fourth pillar, of course, is culture. And we often don't talk about this in the context of pillars. It's almost always people, process, and technology. But the truth is that culture is the thing that will kill your data governance effort almost immediately. So we really want to make sure that we think about our culture as a change management effort. And one of the best ways to achieve this is through a communication plan. And it's really, in the beginning, that simple. I want you to understand that data governance is really about ambassadorship, promoting and protecting your asset. And your primary job as a data governance leader is to have a communication plan, and that should be the fabric of everything that you do in your data governance efforts. You're always out there communicating and making sure that people understand, because the best way to do that is, one of the best benefits to doing that, right, is that you start to create supporters and champions in your organization that understand what you're doing and why you're doing it. And the more people you have that are your champions, the more people that are actively using the data, increasing that data usage, your data quality improves, because more eyeballs on it means more feedback to you. And as you get that feedback, then there's more benefit to the data itself. So that is the culture piece of this puzzle. So how do we pull all this together? Because I've said a lot, and there's a lot more to be said. But I want to give you just a couple of takeaways here. So the first thing is, I really want you to think about why you're doing this. Why would you want to disrupt your data governance? I would have figured that if you're attending Data.World, you know that they approach this work very differently. And I would figure that you like agile approaches. But I want you to sit and think about why you're disrupting data governance in your organization, and make sure that it's about the value that you're going to provide to your organization through these new ways of thinking about data governance. So when you think about that, increasing the usage, improving data quality, creating or maintaining a data lineage, and ensuring data protection, then start thinking about, well, who are the people? Do I need a council or committee? What kind of leader do I really need to remove barriers and move things forward? Excuse me. Pardon me. So the next thing I need you to do then is to think about those processes and how an agile transformation might work for your organization. And I don't want you to take on anything big. So if you have a couple of champions, maybe you've identified a data steward, the next thing is to do a little bit of a proof of concept. Run a sprint, see how it works. Run a second one, do a retro. See if there's anything that you can work out in terms of those kinks. And just kind of start small. And that's one of my favorite agile sayings is think big, start small, and act fast. And then you can start to think about what technology will help you improve at scale from a data governance perspective. And finally, and maybe even most importantly, write a communication plan. Know that this is really about a cultural shift and the ecosystem in which your organization is going to have to take on data in order to become, data-driven, which is what everybody is trying to do. So take it slow, but understand first and foremost the why and the what and the how and the who. There's another one, but anyway. All right. So we had a few questions mailed in to us before this session, and I want to get to a couple of those now. Some of my favorites here. Okay, so dear Laura, I have a chicken or egg question that's keeping me up at night. Boy, me too. What comes first, data literacy or data governance? Sleepless in Seattle. Wonder if they're actually in Seattle or if they're just sleepless and they liked the name of it. Anyway, I love this question because I've been thinking a lot about this lately. Data literacy has been a bit of a bellwether for modern data governance. Data governance actually historically came first. Data literacy came quite a bit afterwards. But it was this attempt of organizations to help improve usage, right? Oh, we have all this data, but nobody knows how to use it. So let's create data literacy programs. Oh, crap, we created these data literacy programs. A whole bunch of people are using data, but now we don't know how to govern it because nobody has standard definitions or data quality parameters. So it was a bit of a bellwether for how to fix our data governance functions. So data governance, in my mind, absolutely comes first, without question. Because if you're going to unleash a whole bunch of people newly trained on data, but you have no way of, defining it, understanding the lineage of where it comes from or where it lands, whether or not data quality is particularly good, disaster probably is a fair word. So in my mind, data governance, of course, will always come first. There's actually a concept of data governance literacy that I kind of like. Different topic. Dear Laura, I work as a data analyst at a tech startup in London, and I'm disappointed by my organization's approach to data governance. Everything is locked down. Should I be doing this in an English accent, or would that be really offensive? Yeah, very offensive. We claim to be data-driven, but how can that be true if no one has access to data? How can I convince my leadership team that our methodology needs to change? Well, loving life, but not my job in London. Good question. And I get this all the time. We hear about this all the time. Like, my executive stakeholders don't understand, or nobody really wants to, support us. They might be interested in the beginning, but not in the end. And that's probably true. And honestly, this is probably our fault. As data governance practitioners, we have not been very good about making a very clean, understandable, value-add definition of data governance to our organization. So that's first and foremost, is understanding the value to your organization. By the way, the fear-mongering that's often used in data governance, which is, well, if we don't do this, there's going to be a huge fine, right, is very short-lived. Yeah, it might get you a little bit of the way there, but I think there's a fair amount of experience that's understood that scaremongering sort of fear tactics might get you, support for a little while, but over time, if your organization doesn't experience any of those things, then they're going to probably pull the plug. So while it can be part of your coffers of how you communicate, it's probably not the thing long-term that you want to be relying on. What you want to rely on is the value. And you want to make sure that you're really clear about what that does for your organization and in pretty, very clear, not abstract, but you know what I'm saying, ways, right? You want to be concise about how you define value to your organization for data governance. And then probably the best way is just to kind of prove it over time. And one of the great things I like about change management constructs is you start with the people that are champions. You don't worry about the naysayers. You worry about those later. So come up with a really clear definition of the value to your organization. Start with a couple of champions. Prove a couple of great things that you can do by using the data, and then go back to your executives. Generally speaking, if you can prove to your executives that you know how to add value and it's not going to cost them like $1 gazillion, they'll give you a little bit of rope to see how far you can go. So that's the best way to approach that, in my opinion. Finally, dear Laura, I report to the Chief Data Officer at a Global 2000 company known for its innovative technology. I wonder who it could be. Our data governance practices, though, not so innovative. I would like to introduce the concept of agile data governance to my boss, but I know I need to come prepared with more than just high-level talking points. What resources do you suggest I share with them to provide tangible evidence of the value of agile data governance? Oh boy. So many people are terrified of agile transformations because they've heard horror stories about what it means to make that transition from waterfall to agile. And I can certainly understand that. I've seen a lot of disastrous consequences as well to agile transformations. And so when you add something like data governance, which many organizations do feel is critically important and a big value add to an agile transformation, they get a little bit nervous. So here's what I would do is I'd take a look at how your organization considers itself to be in terms of innovative. And there's different types of innovations, right? But if there's a way that they think about themselves, then what you want to do is you want to kind of match that innovative approach to things. There's a whole bunch of different ways to think about agile, from Scrum to XP, Kanban, and I'm not an expert, right? Agile, little a, standing here. But what is important when you make these big transitions, these big culture shifts, is to make sure you understand how your organization thinks about themselves. And if they consider themselves to be innovative, agile data governance is pretty innovative. And the other thing that I think is critically important, as we already talked about, is the fact that if you can provide actual tangible value in 2-week sprints, that's the best way to prove, right? Because the proof is in the pudding. So maybe also consider running a little bit of a proof of concept, trying out different methods of agile, what might work for your organization. Or if your organization is already adapted to one way of thinking about agile, then see if that works for data. Sometimes it won't, by the way. But give it a shot and try, right? Because the best way to prove it is to actually prove it. But the only way you're really going to get there is if you practice and give it a shot, right? Because what you're doing is you're creating muscle memory for your organization to think about breaking this big thing down into small increments and proving that you're doing it by providing value, like actual definitions of something. Data quality parameters, a data quality dashboard, all of those other kinds of things that often happen as a tangible result of data governance efforts. All right. That is my time with you today. Thank you so much, Data.World, and the summit attendees for listening to my hot takes on data governance. I do appreciate it. And as always, you can find me those places, Twitter, moxieanalytics.com. And if you ever have a question about data governance, please feel free to send in a Dear Laura. Thank you.